day, everybody. It's Menopause Taylor here, giving you more insights into menopause. I like to call this education Menopause University. And although my education is just like what you encountered in school with all the material delivered in organized units, sometimes I like to give you something unusual about which to ponder. And today is one of those times. So there is no number associated with this tutorial. Rather, it is a timely one with current events. Nevertheless, it is still quite educational. And watching it will help you to put some things into perspective. You know, I tend to see parallels between dissimilar things that other people don't seem to associate with one another. And I think it's just perhaps that my brain is wired a little bit weirdly. In any case, I want to shed some light on something I find blatantly obvious. It is this. HRT is the COVID of menopause. And this is the case for a number of reasons, and I'll delineate all of them for you. The reason I've noticed these parallels is because we've been in the throes of the COVID pandemic for about 2 years now. And the entire time COVID has dominated everybody else's lives, the topic of menopause has continued to dominate my life. And frequently, as the news reported this or that about COVID, I would think, that's just like menopause. And occasionally I found myself noticing that despite the similarities between COVID and menopause, some of our reactions to them are very different. So I wanted to take this opportunity to point out just how similar they are and just how similar or different our reactions to various aspects of the two are. And you'll quickly see that HRT is indeed the COVID of menopause. So one by one, I'll present the various aspects of COVID that have something in common with menopause in general or with HRT for menopause in particular. Let's start with history. From a historical perspective, both pandemics and menopause have been part of the human condition for a very long time. Granted, we've been plagued by pandemics for a much longer time than we've been surviving beyond the transition into menopause. But neither one of them is foreign to us anymore. A pathogen has always been the greatest terrorist to mankind. Historically, pathogens were the most common cause of death. And we've been having outbreaks of contagious diseases, epidemics, and pandemics since the beginning of time. It has never been a question of whether we'll have another pandemic. It's always merely been a question of when we'll have another pandemic. So it should not have surprised us when COVID hit. Likewise, while we have not been living long enough to experience menopause since the beginning of human existence, we have been living long enough for it to be a routine part of female development since before the year 1900. So we've had well over 100 years of experience with it. Now it's so common that people mistake it as natural, when in fact, it's actually a consequence of outliving our ovaries. And there's nothing natural about that. But natural or not, every woman is going to experience menopause. It's as certain as death and taxes. And death is the only way any woman is going to avoid menopause. So, from the standpoint of history, neither COVID nor menopause should come as a surprise. The next thing to consider is our level of preparedness for these two inevitable events. I just told you that from the standpoint of history, neither COVID nor menopause should come as a surprise to us. But despite their inevitability, both pandemics and menopause tend to catch people completely off guard. When it comes to pandemics, we've had deadly pandemics that killed millions upon millions of people. And we've had mild pandemics that created very little havoc. But Given the fact that it is well known that there will always be yet another pathogen that threatens us in the form of a pandemic, you would think that we'd be more prepared. You would expect humans to have adapted a way of life that either predicts or prevents pandemics, but no. Instead, we just go on living carelessly in just about every aspect of our lives. Instead of raising awareness about how pandemics come about, we choose to remain ignorant until we're in the throes of a pandemic. I always say, failing to prepare is preparing to fail. This is definitely true in the context of pandemics. What about menopause? Even though every woman will experience menopause, how prepared are they for it? Shockingly, most women don't even know what menopause is. They may not even know that it exists. It consists of over 20 annoying symptoms that really get your attention and interfere with your life. Even though menopause makes its presence known with a whole host of obvious symptoms, most women are completely clueless, even in cases where menopause hits them over the head like a ton of bricks. And if you're unprepared for menopause, you will not manage it very well. So, failing to prepare is preparing to fail. This lack of recognition is not limited to just women themselves, though. Medical professionals are unprepared too. They do not receive an education on menopause in medical school. 4-year OB/GYN residency programs devote only about 1% of that time to menopause. Menopause practitioners are rare among the various subspecialties of female medicine. You see, this is really odd given the fact that the menopausal age group is the fastest growing and largest sector of female existence. So how can it be that we are so unprepared for both pandemics and menopause when both are so predictable and inevitable? The next thing to consider is the severity of pandemics and menopause. It's understandable when people ignore things that are mild or minor, but it's incomprehensible when they ignore things that are severe and major. So even though pandemics have always been a life-threatening reality for humankind, many people did not believe that the COVID pandemic was real. They thought it was merely a hoax drummed up by an entity other than a pathogen. And they propagated that suspicion to others. Before long, there were huge bands of people declaring that there was no pandemic at all, even though hospitals were overwhelmed with COVID patients and deaths were frequent. With menopause, the same kind of denial of severity exists. Many women adopt the belief that menopause will not happen to them. They have the audacity to think that they can prevent it by simply eating whatever they consider to be the right diet or doing whatever they consider to be the right exercise. It's as if people will do anything to avoid accepting the true severity of a situation if they don't like its implications. This is partly due to the next factor of consideration, which is distinctions. With COVID, it is critical to distinguish between a disease over which you have control and the ability to avoid, versus one over which you have no control and cannot avoid. You can decrease or eliminate getting heart disease, high blood pressure, and diabetes by adopting diet and lifestyle habits that prevent them. It's a matter of how you live your own life. But you cannot control a tiny virus. You can't see it. You don't know when you get exposed to it. And you can't avoid it simply by adopting a certain diet or lifestyle. It's everywhere. In the same way, you can decrease your risk for heart attack, osteoporosis, and Alzheimer's with your lifestyle. But doing so doesn't mean you won't still experience menopause and have a higher risk of all three directly due to menopause. You have to distinguish between that which you can control and that which you cannot control. And with both COVID and menopause, people fail to make the necessary distinctions. This is in keeping with the serenity prayer, which says, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Sadly, most people do not know the difference. This problem with distinctions leads to the next parallel between COVID and menopause. Ignorance. How much of an education do most people have on viruses? None. There's no viral education in school. Most people have learned all they know about viruses from the media, which is not a valid source of any kind of any education. And despite their ignorance, most people do not make any formal endeavor to learn more about viruses in general or COVID in particular. They are completely comfortable with their ignorance. But despite their complete ignorance, they still offer their opinions about COVID. I find this shocking. You see, my father was a strict military man, and the entire time I was growing up, he used to say, you don't deserve an opinion until you have an education. And now that I'm in my 60s, I see just how right he was. Well, what about menopause? How much of an education did you have on menopause before becoming a student here at Menopause University? Most women know absolutely nothing about menopause, and they are completely shocked when they start learning the facts here at Menopause University, which are the complete opposite of everything they thought they knew beforehand. So all the ignorance leads to one distortion after another. And before you know it, we get to the next parallel. People have created all sorts of theories and stories about what they consider to be the real situation, and these are known as conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories about the COVID pandemic ranged from governments collaborating to overpower society to the media creating drama. The possibility of a real pathogen causing a real pandemic was disregarded. Conspiracies about menopause range from claiming that it's all in a woman's head to women labeling other women weak if they just can't tough it out, to the medical profession converting a natural process into a disease. What's so difficult about just accepting the truth? COVID is a pandemic pathogen that is contagious whether you like it or not. And menopause is a real physical, emotional, and psychological transition that's going to happen whether you like it or not. And when it does, it will be tough to tough it out, and it certainly won't feel natural. With the conspiracy theories percolating, the facts and the focus become more distorted and exaggerated, creating our next parallel. With the pandemic, people start protesting against the virus. Really? Do you think a virus cares about protests? How in the world is gathering to protest going to make any difference other than spreading the virus even more? And when it comes to menopause, women thwart efforts to improve common knowledge on menopause by seeing it as taboo and being in denial about its very existence. Instead of viewing menopause as puberty in reverse, they view it as getting old and decrepit. These distortions and exaggerations do absolutely nothing to make either situation better, but they do serve to make them more illogical, and that's the next parallel between COVID and menopause. With COVID, the desire to have life as it was before the pandemic turned into protest against infringement of freedom. No longer is it a matter of infectious disease. Suddenly, it's about constitutional rights. How can preventing spread of a pathogen become a matter of unconstitutionally restricting freedom? It can't. It's entirely illogical. And with menopause, the underlying fact that menopause is a hormone deficiency gets lost in the rhetoric about society's focus on youth and sexiness. So people completely ignore the implications of a hormone deficiency on the human body. And instead, they focus on the embarrassment they feel at the thought of becoming menopausal. Is that logical? Of course not. Ignoring the true essence of the situation does not make it go away. And then, once all the illogic kicks in, you have the next parallel between COVID and menopause, which is fact versus faux. Fact. Humans are the legs for any pathogen. If we move, they move. From person to person, that is. If we pass the pathogen from person to person, it survives and thrives. But if we stay still and it can't pass from person to person, it dies off and we thrive. Faux. If you can't see the pathogen, it doesn't exist. Or, since humans are big and the pathogen is small, we'll win in any battle between the two of us. Fact. The lifespan of a virus is only a few days, and it can change its entire genome to adapt to anything we do to kill it in just a month or two. Humans live for decades and require over 100 generations to change our DNA. Faux. If we just go on about our business, the virus will disappear. We don't have to inconvenience ourselves in order to overcome it. Fact. Estrogen was your fountain of youth. When you lose it, you start aging on the inside and the outside. That aging comes with increased risks for diseases that are due to estrogen deficiency, which are heart attack, osteoporosis, and Alzheimer's. Estrogen deficiency is a hormone deficiency you were never supposed to experience simply because you were never supposed to live as long as we're living these days. And like any hormone deficiency, if you don't replace the deficient hormone, you will have diseases that result from the deficiency. Faux. Since all women eventually lose their estrogen and experience menopause, it's natural. If you just get through it, everything will go back to normal. You can possibly even avoid menopause with proper diet and lifestyle. It's as if we just can't handle the truth. So we morph it into something we find more appealing. The next parallel is trying to find a middle ground between fact and faux. When it comes to COVID, deep down, people acknowledge the fact that pathogens are dangerous and that viruses are ubiquitous. So they exhibit small efforts to avoid it, like erecting little plexiglass screens even though there is open space all around them. Imposing curfews to close early, even though the virus doesn't care what time of day it is. Making adults wear masks but not kids, even though kids are already little mobile petri dishes. Do people really believe that these feeble efforts are going to prevent spread of the virus? A virus can go around the plexiglass and still infect you before curfew, especially when there are crowds trying to beat the curfew, and infect any human regardless of age. The middle ground efforts for menopause include trying all sorts of diets, vitamins, minerals, supplements, and herbs to balance non-existent hormones, or exercising to regulate non-existent hormones. Don't women realize that a hormone is a hormone? and that no kind of diet, vitamin, mineral, supplement, herb, or exercise can take the place of a hormone? Why do we try to fix the problem with everything except the very missing thing that's causing the problem? Hormone replacement is precisely what we do for every other hormone deficiency known to man or woman. To accommodate the combination of illogical fear over a perfectly logical solution, professionals drum up goofy mantras. These attempt to walk the fine line between knowing that there is benefit in the antidote while also acknowledging the public's fear of it. With COVID vaccines, they recommend vaccination of adults, but not children. Why? The kids are the ones who carry the virus around asymptomatically, giving it to all the older folks. With HRT for menopause, the guidelines recommend taking the lowest dosage for the shortest time. Why? Do they think the hormone deficiency is going to last only a short time? These middle grounds are like telling a smoker that she can smoke just one pack of cigarettes daily for 10 years and it'll be fine, but more than that will be dangerous. And one of the most striking parallels between COVID and menopause is the availability, but fear, of the antidote. The antidote against a virus consists of a vaccine. And a vaccine is a tiny dose of the dead virus that enables your body to mount a response to it without having to actually get sick. But people fear that the vaccine is more dangerous than the actual disease, and they refuse to get vaccinated. Hormone replacement therapy for estrogen deficiency is merely a matter of replacing your lost hormones with another source of the same hormone your own body used to produce. And just like insulin replacement or thyroid hormone replacement, it solves the problem of estrogen deficiency in one fell swoop. It eradicates all the miserable symptoms, prevents the diseases due to estrogen deficiency, and restores your quality of life. But women claim that hormone replacement therapy is dangerous and will cause cancer or kill them. Does this mean that your own body produced a deadly poisonous hormone for about 40 years? If so, why did you feel and look so young and healthy when you had it, but feel and look so old and unhealthy when you lose it? How did it go from being divine to dangerous? And how can estrogen replacement be more dangerous than getting the deadly diseases that result from estrogen deficiency? If hormone replacement is so dangerous, why isn't anybody afraid of insulin replacement or thyroid hormone replacement? The next parallel between COVID and menopause is how all the hype and fear make it so that people are unable to see the big picture. Yes, the COVID pandemic is indeed a pandemic. But how much of a toll does it take on human lives? It kills only 2% of the people who get it. That's exactly the same as the annual flu. This is very unlike the pandemics we've had in the past that decimated huge populations of people. Yet, we've never reacted to those much deadlier pandemics with such massive shutdowns of society. This is the first time we've shut down whole economies and confined whole countries. The result? Massive economic crisis, psychological breakdowns, skyrocketing divorce, severe isolation, clinical depression. Failing to see the big picture of menopause is similar. Despite the fact that you'll outlive your ovaries, we have ways of replacing the hormone deficiency that it will create. This is no different from any other hormone deficiency that we treat with hormone replacement. But we don't demonize other hormone replacements, only HRT for menopause. What's so difficult about acknowledging that hormone replacement for menopause makes as much sense as it does for any other hormone deficiency. And by failing to see the big picture, we create trade-offs. That's the next parallel. With COVID, we've traded a 2% death rate for global economic crises that will endure for years, if not decades. Economies have fallen, businesses have failed, livelihoods have disappeared. Is the trade-off worth it? Perhaps the pandemic itself was not as big a problem as our reaction to it. With menopause, we've traded fear of an inevitable hormone deficiency and its hormone replacement for a miserable quality of life and high risk for 3 deadly diseases. Does that sound like a good swap? It seems that with both COVID and menopause, our reaction has constituted either massive overkill or merely a band-aid. That's our next parallel. The reaction to COVID was overkill. As evidenced by the trade-offs, the overreaction did more damage than good. With menopause, neglect of the topic, ignorance of its significance, and rejection of the antidote constitute merely putting a band-aid on a situation that could be solved. Women are doomed to a lower quality of life. You would think that people would wake up to all these things that make both COVID and menopause so wonky. But they don't. And the reason they don't is because in both instances, people throw out the science and replace it with opinions or scare tactics. This constitutes our next parallel between the two. When the science of virology doesn't fit someone's opinion or desires, they throw out the science and replace it with their own opinion. They discount the credibility of experts in order to justify their own behavior. So viral biology be damned. How dare anyone tell me I can't do as I please because of a microscopic bug? And with menopause, basic biology and gynecology become the enemy if they provide a solution that is not in keeping with the hype of the times. Marketing and propaganda trump logic. So instead of using reliable pharmacologic hormone replacement, women fall for the scams that promote indwelling pellets, compounded hormones, and herbal supplements that have no menopausal benefit whatsoever. And ironically, these alternatives are labeled as natural, whereas the only reliable solution is labeled as harmful. The next parallel? This is all due to fear. Fear is the most powerful emotion on earth. And once fear is part of the equation, the response to it is anything but logical or rational. We've had several pandemics in the past, but we've never reacted or overreacted to any of them the way we reacted to COVID. And COVID doesn't even come close to being the most deadly one. So the pandemic itself wasn't nearly as much of a problem as our reaction to it. This is also the case with menopause. The most significant generator of fear with regard to menopause has been the WHI, the Women's Health Initiative study. There have been hundreds of studies on HRT, and they have always found all sorts of varying results, but none of them has been deemed the Bible of studies and used to debunk all the others. Nor has the reaction to any of the others ever caused the fear, confusion, and damage to women's lives that the WHI has caused. Society's reaction to the WHI was completely irrational and illogical. And like the reaction to COVID, more lives were destroyed due to the irrational reaction than to the actual issue. And with all these reactions generated by fear, another parallel emerges between COVID and menopause. This one pertains to the antidote. Is it personal or societal? For COVID, it's the vaccine. For menopause, it's HRT. The vaccine against COVID is not a personal matter. It's a societal matter. There's no way we'll surpass the COVID or any other pandemic if the vaccine is a matter of personal choice. There is no way that an unvaccinated person does not pose a risk to others. But people are behaving and protesting and demanding that vaccination be a matter of personal choice. And HRT is just the opposite. The decision as to whether or not to take HRT is a personal matter. A woman's use of HRT does not affect the rest of society, beyond making it easier for others to tolerate her. I guess you could sarcastically say that social distancing is mandatory with COVID, but voluntary with menopause. But if a woman incurs risk from HRT, it does not affect anyone but her. So the vaccine isn't about the individual, while HRT is. And another parallel between COVID and menopause is that they both create disagreement and division among people. With COVID, the maskers are against the anti-maskers. The vaxxers are against the anti-vaxxers. It's gotten so bad that vaxxers exclude anti-vaxxers from social events and anti-vaxxers destroy vaccination hubs. With menopause, pro-HRT women are ostracized or terrorized by women who tell them that HRT is dangerous. Anti-HRT women are marginalized by their symptoms. There's even division between patients and their doctors. Some doctors are opposed to HRT while others think all women should use HRT. So doctors who are against HRT won't prescribe it for the women who want it, and doctors who are for HRT push it on women who don't want it. There are even scams by doctors who call themselves hormone specialists but know nothing about menopause. The whole thing is just a great big mess. Why can't everybody just get along? Why are we so judgmental of others and so intolerant of those who choose a path different from our own? COVID and menopause are also parallels in that people just want to have their cake and eat it too, as they say. They want things both ways with regard to both COVID and menopause. For COVID, they want to be able to roam, travel, and attend public events. They want their former way of life back, but they don't want to get the COVID vaccine so that they can have it back. For menopause, women want to feel the way they felt before they lost their estrogen. They want to continue to age gradually instead of suddenly. They want their quality of life back, but they don't want to take HRT in order to get it back. Well, folks, I'm sorry to tell you, you can't have it both ways. You have to choose. As the whole COVID drama has played out over the last couple of years, I've sat back in awe of the parallels between the reactions to COVID and the reactions to menopause. I think we humans just refuse to accept anything we don't like. And the result is a litany of chaos and distortion. And in the process, we make the situation worse than it was to begin with. So no matter what your stance on COVID or menopause, when you compare the two, you really see that HRT is the COVID of menopause. So there you have it. This is my kind of current events video. I hope it resonated with you on some level. Just give this some thought. And next week, I'll begin a huge unit again that addresses all three of the diseases caused by estrogen deficiency. You'll discover all sorts of things that weren't apparent when we addressed each disease alone. As always, I invite you to visit my website, which is menopausetailor.me, and please schedule a consultation because it will definitely change your life for the better, forever. Another wise move is to sign up for my newsletter. You'll get bi-weekly blogs and promotions. And you know you can find me on social media. Bye!